The guy's a monster. He's 6'9", 440 pounds, just a behemoth of a human. And he's always a force to be reckoned with. And then you have, two guys that were at the top of the podium last year. Oleksiy Novikov coming back, who won the competition last year, and Trey Mitchell, who just barely taking second place. So there's, going down the list of names here, it's just it's one of these ones where you look at the 10 competitors and it's like, cool, 8 of you could be on the podium. It's really impressive for us to be at a point in the sport where every single competition, every person on the competition floor has a chance to be top 3.
Yeah. What do you think has brought the sport to that point? There's, any sort of sport kind of has its, machinations of the early adopters. They joke in basketball. They used to say that, the early guys were playing against plumbers and electricians and stuff like that. Then you have the professionalization of a sport, and then you get money and all these other things that start to pour into it, and athleticism grows. And I'm curious what has brought strongman to this point where now, like you said, 8 people could be on the podium, and there's a ton of really talented guys that could win.
I think there's a lot of factors. I think one, it's funny. I'm going to be turning 32 next month, but I'm one of the kind of like the old guards here in the sport because I've been doing it since I was 17. So I've seen this sport throughout this entire transition period and seen these new competitions pop up. So first and foremost, it's the sexiness that there's some good money in it now. Right, we're seeing competitions that we're seeing over 6-figure first place, prize purses, and we're seeing a lot more notoriety. I think also there's a cultural shift, especially here in the U.S., where people are starting to appreciate niche sports and strength training. We see it over in the U.K. when I go and compete, for Giants Live over in the U.K. and in England. I've competed in front of 12,000 seat arenas, completely sold out. I got to compete at Wembley Arena and Wembley Stadium, like these amazing, iconic venues. And there's just a culture that appreciates strength over there that hasn't really trickled over here just yet. But I think we're starting to see those wheels turn. A lot of the credit goes to CrossFit with the implementation of more strongman implements into CrossFit competition. And people seeing that and wanting to get their hands on it. And then you have companies like Rogue and like these other equipment companies that are making strongman equipment more accessible to the everyday athlete. I think it's just that perfect marriage while we're seeing this kind of push for fitness, especially here in the US, that's helping grow the sport really organically, but also getting more athletes excited about wanting to progress in their career as a strongman and no longer thinking of it as just a hobby.
What do you think is still missing when it comes to the growth of strongman, maybe as a whole, but also specific to the U.S.?
There's a relatability aspect that people don't quite understand. And what I mean by that is you look at the Rogue Invitational last year, and we were doing a 1,000-pound yoke walk for 50 feet into a log clean and press at 365 pounds for 3 reps. Yes, numbers, that sounds heavy, right? But your average person that's watching that, they don't understand what that feels like or what that means. So for us to carry 1,000 pounds, 50 feet in under 10 seconds, yeah, it's really impressive. But nobody's ever been under that kind of weight or under any weight ever. So what I always tell people is like, hey, you know what? Like next time you're in your CrossFit gym, most CrossFit gyms have a yoke at this point. Throw 300 pounds on there. Take it for a stroll. See how it feels. Right? And then you start to like put into context like, oh, damn, all right, yeah, 1,000 pounds is pretty heavy. So I think there's just there's a disconnect in the relatability of what we do that makes it difficult for people to fully comprehend. Whereas CrossFit, I think the thing that they've done so well is they do movements that mostly everybody's done at one point in their life. Whether it's, pull-ups are crazy and sometimes people can't do them, but they've all hung from a monkey bar. Jump rope we do as kids. We know people go for runs, and the weights are things that people can comprehend. Looking at Fran, a 95-pound barbell, people can understand 95 pounds. They can't understand 500 pounds overhead. So I think there's just that disconnect that makes it difficult for people to really appreciate and get behind.
Yeah. Good. Well, I was just going to say the inclusion of some of the strongman implements at the games, I think, has started to, add to that. You mentioned, there's a sandbag clean that was or ground to shoulder that was, the premier event at the games just a year ago, maybe that in the Capitol too. But that also had, the Husafel bag carry. Both of the two biggest events at the games had strongman implements in it that I think starts that little bug of curiosity to where, people are going to go back to their gym and maybe that sandbag that's been hanging out in the corner that people use to sit on, after their WOD, they might actually go mess around with it and start to have that appreciation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really cool thing, right? And the implementation of that in CrossFit, where a lot of people are getting their hands on these things, then it starts to make sense, right? We talk about the Husafel of the Capitol. Men had 200 pounds, I think it was, at the end of that run, at the end of that event up the Capitol steps. Rogue Invitational last year, we had Husafel carry. It was 420 pounds for max distance, right?
Yeah.
More than double that. And, sandbag to shoulder, right? I mean, I will say that sandbag to shoulder event, all of the athletes completely exceeded my expectations. When that event was announced, I was thinking the men would probably be in that 310 to 320 pound range. A athlete would get it. And then the women probably in that 220 range. Obviously, both of those numbers got blown out of the water with the men hitting 340, attempting 350, and Danny Spiegel throwing around 250 like a pillow. So that was really cool because even in strongman, like for our 200 pound strongman athletes, 350 pounds to shoulder is a big sandbag. So I think that was really cool to see. And it was, I think the CrossFitters gained a lot of respect in the strongman space from that event too, realizing, hey, these athletes have never touched weights like this on these implements. They got, a couple of minutes prior to going out on the competition floor to warm up and play around with these things, and they're still hitting these weights. So there was really great respect grown, from strongman into CrossFit that way, but also helping people understand what strongman is and how accessible the implements are in their own gyms to start picking some things up and having some fun with them.
Why is it important for CrossFit athletes? And maybe I would categorize this like serious CrossFit athletes, and maybe everyday ones as well. But why is it important for them to mix in some strongman elements like stones or sandbags or logs or yokes?
Let's think about the foundations of CrossFit, right? Being ready for the unknown and unknowable. I think that's, first and foremost, why it's so important. I think there's unbelievable translation between strongman events and everyday movements. Think about doing yard work, right? Like how often are you having to move stones and move logs and, just doing stuff like that around the house? Well, we just do that in a little bit more of in a way that's, under some guise and has some plan behind it. I also think there's a lot of transferability between strongman movements and barbell lifts, which are then going to make you better at, whether it's getting stronger in CrossFit, getting stronger for life, or fitter in general. What I always tell my athletes is, if you can manhandle a 150 or 250 or a 200 pound sandbag or stone, think about how much easier that barbell at that same weight's going to feel because it's more controlled, right? A lot of the movement patterns are the same, picking things up off the floor, going to our shoulder, going overhead. If we can do them with awkward implements, our standard implements and our standard gym equipment is going to feel that much easier. And I think that's really where the translation really comes into play. Not to mention, we need to get stronger with different things. And I think a lot of people get really comfortable in training in the same lifters, training on the same squat rack with the same barbell and the same plates and loading it up the same way. Well, competition's never the same as your gym. And I think stepping outside of that box a little bit and testing yourself with some different implements and making yourself uncomfortable is where we see real true strength gains and really see you develop positively as an athlete.
At what point in a CrossFitter's strength training should those things be implemented?
I think with anything, the earlier the better, because even with strongman, everything is scalable, right? I think a lot of people look at strongman, they see what we do, and there's no way I can do that. I'm not even going to bother touching it. But I look at my journey through strongman. When I started competing, I was competing in the 200 pound weight class, back 14 years ago. And then I evolved up to the middleweight division, which is 231 or 105 kilos, then jumped up to the heavyweight division. And throughout every iteration of my career, I've been doing the same events. The weights have just been adjusted for where I was at in my career. So I think for people to look at a yoke or look at a log or look at farmers handles and not be intimidated right away, but understand, like, you know what, I don't have to throw 600 pounds on here. I could do 200, still get a really good training stimulus, still feel what this feels like on my back and how I can move. I think it just builds up that confidence, that comfortability with strongman implements, which is just going to help grow it and push the sport into a better direction.
Taking a look back at the field of athletes here, I remember last year, and even maybe before that too, but hearing like Mitchell Hooper as this kind of like up and coming guy, an athlete that maybe is looking to have a breakout or has this potential that eventually is going to get fulfilled. Is there anyone in the field that kind of fits that? Maybe it's a dark horse, someone that you think could maybe stand on the podium, or even someone that could maybe catch a tailwind and push for the top spot that a lot of the strongmen know and are like, yeah, it's only a matter of time, or someone that could completely catch us off guard.
The big name that comes to mind for that is Tom Evans. So Tom Evans kind of came onto the scene at the Arnold Strongman Classic this past year, took 5th place. Tom played for the Green Bay Packers, so he has a really great athletic background, and he also has that. I get back to the ignorance of youth on his side.
Yeah.
That's a factor.
He's a younger guy in terms of his strongman age. So he just has, that giddy factor of competing at these big shows, which sometimes allows you to just let your guard down and just go tear it up on the competition floor. And with a competition like the Rogue Invitational, we talked a little bit about earlier about how it's kind of this really great, blend of really heavy, but also needing a lot of athleticism. He fits that mold really well with his NFL background. The guy's strong as an ox, and he moves really well. And I think all of those things, if he can piece together a really great show, he'll definitely steal points from people on a lot of events, but definitely has that potential to sneak onto the podium as well.
Let's shift gears to HWPO and what you guys have going on with your athletes. And we are in the CrossFit off season. Where are you guys now with your elite games athletes as far as training is concerned? I'm guessing, did you sort of take learnings from the games and now you're applying it to training? But what does that process look like now as you work your way into 2024?
Yeah, I will say this games was a big learning year. Just from a coaching perspective, where we were in 2022 to 2023 is very different as a company and a camp. And we took a lot of what our athletes did, a lot of how we were interacting with them, and kind of flipped it all on its head. And I will say, from a coach's perspective, as a team, we are completely involved in virtually every part of these athletes' lives right now. They're probably getting sick of hearing from us, but they're so responsive in terms of, giving feedback, letting us know what's going on. So from a training perspective, we have, 4 really strong, amazing CrossFit coaches that are doing a lot of the bulk of their off-season training, and then myself and Amy Everett handling a lot of their barbell stuff. Amy on the Olympic lifting side, myself on the strength side, as well as the odd object stuff. So one thing that we're really taking a kind of pushing our heads into is kind of prioritizing some odd object training. I think it's something that a lot of camps don't often do. But I think looking at the landscape of where the sport could be going, it's something we felt we needed to prioritize. And going back to what I was saying in terms of getting people reps on these things, it's only going to help them as an athlete when it comes to the more standard movements as well. Getting them stronger in awkward and uncomfortable positions is only going to make them stronger when they're in control. So we've been really having a lot of fun kind of putting these programs together for all of our athletes, the ones that are returning, the new ones. And really the debrief after the games, we had a lot of really hard conversations with ourselves and with each other about how did we miss the mark for our athletes, and what do we need to do better to support them to get better performances out of them in the 2024 season.
Where'd you net
Can
out
you
with that?
speak-
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
No, you're fine,
I
Sean.
was just saying, so in those conversations, what are the big takeaways that you guys had, or the biggest lessons that you learned?
I think the biggest things that we learned were, I think, from my perspective, we let athletes get a little bit too comfortable. I think, from a coach's perspective, there are things we could have done to push them a little bit harder, to get them out of their comfort zones and focus differently in the training. And that's really what our priority has been this entire offseason thus far, and still continuing. And that's going to go, all the way through the Open, to be honest. For a lot of these games athletes, our season doesn't start until they're qualified for semis. That's when the season really starts for them. So making sure we're doing everything we can to take advantage of this time off from competition season, getting them in the right headspace, and really making sure we're setting them up and putting all the steps in place to make sure, like I said, we have a really great 2024.
So kind of speaking to that, I mean, when you look at an athlete, and I'll use Katrin as an example, somebody who's been in the sport for so long, who's developed these habits or muscle memory. And I know you and I spoke when I was at HWPO, and you just kind of talked about some of the fundamental lifts that you were working with her. What is the balance between trying to improve that athlete and peeling back those layers to almost improve the longevity versus, oh my gosh, we are trying to follow the sport and the direction that it's going in, and making sure that you're also prepared for these new things?
I think one thing that we've done that we've started to implement is we've been taking more of a scientific and as opposed to an anecdotal approach to our training this year. So we have all of our athletes going through these pretty in-depth movement assessments. And with that, giving video feedback about, okay, like here is a squat from 4 years ago, how you're comfortable doing it. Here's what your squat looks like now. And here's the potential we can see in terms of strength and overall growth. And I think really trying to lean into that and getting our athletes to buy into that has been really important to us, because obviously the only way we get stronger, the only way we grow is through putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. And allowing our athletes to buy into that and understand that's where we as a coaching staff are coming from has been kind of the forefront of how we're approaching this entire offseason. And fortunately, all of the athletes have been unbelievably receptive. And, what's funny is we're going through it, and a lot of them, they're not doing, quote unquote, CrossFit right now. So they don't feel fit. They don't feel like themselves. We're like, yeah, good. That's what we want right now, because in 6 months, you're going to be sick of CrossFit.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to not necessarily to give away the keys to the castle, but what does that look like? Like, how do you keep that interest in what is it? Is it based on an individual basis? Like what they're working on, or where you're trying to add those additional kind of pieces to the mold?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the tough part is all of our games level athletes have completely individualized programs right now. So nothing is cookie cutter. Nothing is really one size fits all. It really is based off the movement assessments we put them through earlier in the off season. And then we developed a plan kind of working backwards based on the needs assessment that was given to figure out, okay, where do we need to prioritize everything right now for these athletes? And how does that look in the overall plan getting ready for the 2024 season? So it's a lot of conversations, a lot of long conversations, not only between us and the athletes, but internally within the coaching staff as well. Because obviously as coaches, we all have our own training philosophies, and we all have what we feel needs to be the priority. So coming to a consensus amongst the coaching staff of 6 people isn't always the easiest thing. But as long as we all have the same mentality of okay, whatever we put on this paper needs to be what is best for the athletes, egos and personal philosophies aside, that's kind of the step we've taken going into this offseason.
Have you been able to work one-on-one with Brooke Wells yet?
I have not. When she went up to Vermont for a little while, and I unfortunately wasn't able to make it up there due to my training schedule and everything going on. But I know that is definitely going to be a priority. I mean, we text, she sends me videos. So like in person, we haven't worked one-on-one, but she's one of those people that we all know she is unbelievably strong. But what's really cool is after looking at all her videos and really assessing her movement and stuff like that, she can be a lot stronger.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Look forward to seeing that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversation going on right now in the CrossFit space about how the sport gets better, how it gets more professionalized, how you make more money.